not have equal talent, but all of us have an equal opportunity to develop our talents. Quote by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. A very warm and colorful evening to one and all present here. Welcome to the Karnataka State Bar Council Law Academy online lecture series on Civil Procedure Code 1908. It gives me immense warmth and great pleasure to grace the presence of our eminent and venerated dignitary, Honorable Justice N. Kumar, retired Judge of High Court of Karnataka, Shri Gautam Chand SF, President of KSBC Law Academy, Shri Anil Kumar JM, Chairman of KSBC Law Academy, all the members and trustees of KSBC Law Academy, delegates, advocates, law students, and all the participants who have gathered virtually here today. After the mind-boggling session, we have now arrived at the day 3 of the online lecture series on Civil Procedure Code 1908. I'm sure the participants must have enjoyed their learning from the previous session and are eagerly waiting to hear more from our esteemed luminary. We look forward for your continued support and participation, and I request all the participants to log in from the same meeting ID and password at 5:30 p.m. till 13th November 2020. Before we get started, I request the participants to feel free to post their questions or clarifications, if any, on the lecture, and we will be taking it up at the end of the session. The foremost thing which is to be determined during the filing of a suit is the place of suing. This decides the place of trial. To enlighten more about this topic, I would like to give my heartfelt welcome to our esteemed luminary, Honorable Justice N. Kumar. Welcome, sir, and the platform is yours.
Thank you. Good evening to all of you. Now, from the previous sessions, we have seen what a lawyer is expected to do before commencing a litigation. The first and the foremost is a civil litigation has to be filed in a civil court. Before you decide to file it in the civil court, you have to find out whether the civil court jurisdiction is expressly or by necessary implication barred to get the relief which your client wants. Once that bar is not there, then you have to decide in which court the suit is to be instituted. Because, say for a place like Bangalore, you have so many number of courts of equivalent jurisdiction dealing with so many matters. So you should be sure where the suit is to be filed. Even in district level, taluk level, today we have more than one court functioning on the civil side. Therefore, filing of a suit in the appropriate court, which has jurisdiction to decide the case, is of utmost importance. Here, fortunately for us, the basic principle dealing with place of suing finds statutory recognition in section 15 of the Civil Procedure Code. It says, courts in which suits to be instituted. Though the heading is worded like that, the section says, every suit shall be instituted in the court of the lowest grade competent to try it. So we have to mark the words. One is lowest grade and then competent to try it. When we say lowest, don't unduly get worried about superior and inferiority. In the hierarchy of courts, depending upon the pecuniary and territorial jurisdictions, different levels are prescribed. Therefore, when the law says you have to file a suit in the court of the lowest grade, competent to try it, that is what a lawyer is expected to find out. Therefore, this section 15 primarily deals with pecuniary and subject matter insofar as to decide the jurisdiction of the court. The word used is competent, not the jurisdiction, but it means the same. The word competent used in this section has reference to the jurisdiction of a court. Jurisdiction means the extent of the authority of a court to administer justice, not only with reference to the subject matter of the suit, but also the local and pecuniary limits of its jurisdiction. Therefore, a lawyer must keep both in mind. One is pecuniary jurisdiction and what is the subject matter of the suit. And in other words, what is the value of the subject matter of the suit, which decides the pecuniary jurisdiction of the court in which the suit is to be filed. This aspect is a rule of procedure. Please bear in mind, this is a rule of procedure, though it is put it in the form of a jurisdiction. Strictly speaking, it is a rule of procedure and not of jurisdiction. So what it lays down is, a suit shall be instituted in the court of lowest grade. When it says so, it does not boost the jurisdiction of the courts of higher grades which they possess under the acts constituting them. Therefore, although it's a matter of procedure, a suit below a certain value ought to be instituted in the court of, for example, civil judge. Above him is the civil judge senior division. He also has the jurisdiction to try. But as a matter of procedure, if a suit is filed before a civil judge senior division, a suit to be tried by a civil judge court, he should not entertain it. He should return the plaintiff to be presented to the lower court. Therefore, when it comes to a higher court entertaining a suit over which it has no jurisdiction, it is a question of procedure. It cannot be said they have no jurisdiction, but normally they should return it. But the converse is not true. Converse is purely a question of jurisdiction. That is, if a suit is to be instituted in a court of higher jurisdiction, but it is filed in the lowest grade, the lowest grade court under no circumstances will have jurisdiction to decide that matter. There it is a question of jurisdiction and not a question of procedure. If that court entertains the suit, passes a decree, that decree would be a nullity because it had no jurisdiction. It so happens sometimes when 2 or 3 suits are pending, one in the lower court, one in the higher court, there is provision for consolidation, clubbing of cases. Therefore, the suits filed in the lower courts are taken to the higher court, and that higher court has the jurisdiction to decide even the courts should be decided by the lower court. But a case which is pending in the higher court cannot be brought to the lower court, or at the same time, the case to be decided by a higher court cannot be decided by the lower courts. So therefore, in one angle, it is a procedural law. In another angle, it is a question of jurisdiction. Now, when we talk about pecuniary jurisdiction, the Civil Procedure Code defines what a pecuniary jurisdiction is. That is found in section 6 of the Civil Procedure Code. So let us carefully read this. It says, save insofar as is otherwise expressly provided, nothing herein contained shall operate to give any court jurisdiction over suits the amount or value of the subject matter of which exceeds the pecuniary limits, if any, of its ordinary jurisdiction. So here, section 6 specifically talks about jurisdictional aspect, pecuniary jurisdiction. In other words, pecuniary jurisdiction refers to the limit to the amount or value of the subject matter involved in a suit that can be filed before it. A court has jurisdiction only over suits the amount or value of whose subject matter does not exceed the pecuniary limits of its ordinary jurisdiction. In fact, different courts are empowered to try different types of suits and may be precluded from entertaining certain kinds of suits. Now, when we talk about pecuniary jurisdiction, one other aspect which a practicing lawyer should bear in mind is valuation of a suit is done in one breath for the purpose of payment of court fee, and in another breath for the purpose of determining the jurisdiction of the court. So the distinction is to be kept in mind. Therefore, in the plaint and also in the valuation slip, you find 2 paragraphs. The suit for the purpose of court fee is valued at rupees so and so, and accordingly a court fee of rupees so and so is paid on the memorandum of plaint. That is, the Karnataka Court Fees and Suits Valuation Act of 1958 gives a list of suits to be filed, how they have to be valued, and what is the court fee payable. So unless that proper court fee paid on the plaint, that plaint has no value. And it is a very important aspect. That's one of the mode of collecting revenue also. So therefore, in the valuation slip, sometimes in the plaint in one para itself, you are expected to state the valuation for the purpose of court fee and the provision under which the court fee is valued and the amount of court fee that is paid. Because if a proper stamp duty court fee is not paid, it would be inadequately stamped plain. Then it is not a plaint at all. Unless the proper court fee is paid, in the eye of law, it is not a plaint, and the court will not entertain the suit. This is as far as payment of court fee is concerned. Now, as far as deciding the jurisdiction of the court is concerned, normally it depends on the subject matter of the suit. Or if it is a case of money suit, what is the amount of money you are trying to recover? So therefore, the valuation for the purpose of jurisdiction depends on the subject matter of the suit, maybe movable property or maybe immovable property, or the amount sought to be recovered. So that determines the jurisdiction. Now, insofar as this jurisdiction aspects is concerned, we have what is called as Karnataka Civil Courts Act of 1964. Civil Procedure Code doesn't deal with it. That this Karnataka Civil Courts Act 1964 defines what a meaning of a civil court. According to the Karnataka Civil Courts Act of 1964, civil court means a district court, a court of a civil judge senior division, and a court of civil judge junior division. That is how, in the state of Karnataka, probably this is where we find it throughout the India: district court, civil judges court, senior division, civil judges court. So 3 layers of courts are constituted. What is the basis for this? What is the criteria for demarcating these 3 courts? That is also found in this Karnataka Civil Courts Act. There they say, section 3, they define the class and designation of civil courts. They say there shall be 3 classes of civil courts subordinate to the High Court, namely the district court, the court of the senior civil judge, and the court of the civil judge. I think if I am right, throughout the country, you have this pattern. Now, it is the state government which establishes these courts. You will have 1 district court at every district. Depending upon the work, the government has the power to have any number of additional district courts. Similarly, at every district level and subdivisional level, you have what is called as civil judge senior division. Again, depending upon the work, you have numerous courts. And at the lowest level, that's called the lowest grade, you have the civil judge court. Earlier it was called as junior. Now it is, the word junior is removed and civil judges court is there. Today in Karnataka, even at taluka levels, we have more than 1 civil judge, more than civil judge senior division. Therefore, the problem is when you have so many courts at a particular place, when you are expected to file a suit, the first principle is file it at the lowest grade. That is, value the subject matter. Find out what is the amount sought to be recovered. On that basis, you look into it. In fact, the Karnataka Civil Courts Act also says how the courts are constituted. On the basis of territorial jurisdiction, a civil judge is constituted at every revenue taluk of the district, and depending upon the work, it is multiplied. On the pecuniary side, a civil judge court will have jurisdiction below 5 lakhs. Below 5 lakhs. Above 5 lakhs, it is the civil judge senior division, and the higher limit, there is no prescribed. Then we also have what is called as court of small causes court. In Bangalore, the value is prescribed at 2 lakhs. If I am right, at the other places, it is about 50,000. Then we also have the appellate jurisdiction of the district court. If it is an appeal from the civil judge senior division and the value is less than 10 lakhs, appeal lies under section 96 to the district court. This is how the court jurisdiction, depending upon pecuniary and territorial, is decided. So therefore, in every case, when you want to pay court fee, you have to look into the provisions of the Court Fees Act and Suit Valuation Act, look to the relief sought for, and then look to that act, Then you value the suit for the purpose of court fee and jurisdiction under that act. For the purpose of finding out where the case is to be filed, you have to go by the Karnataka Civil Courts Act, where the jurisdiction of the civil courts is clearly demarcated. So if the pecuniary limit is less than 5 crores, it is a civil judge. Above 5 lakhs, it is civil judge senior division. And upper limit is not prescribed. So after deciding this pecuniary jurisdiction, then you have to come to the territorial jurisdiction. It is both territorial jurisdiction and pecuniary jurisdiction. Now, section 16 of the Civil Procedure Code speaks about territorial jurisdiction. That is, suits to be instituted where the subject matter is situated. Where subject matter is situated. It says subject to the pecuniary or other limitations. You have to keep both in mind, pecuniary jurisdiction and other limitation means expressly bordered by necessary implication, and then you have to find out what is the value of the subject matter. What are the types which are dealt with under section 16? It may be for the recovery of immovable property with or without rent or profits. That is, you want to recover an immovable property. So the subject matter of the suit is the immovable property. And therefore, question is in which court you are going to file it. Similarly, the second type of suits dealt with are the partition of immovable property. So there is a property belonging to the joint family, a co-partitionary, and now a suit is filed for partition, which is the court which is competent and the jurisdiction to decide the dispute regarding partition. Again, partition subject matter is normally an immovable property. There may be some movable properties also. Then you have what is called as mortgage suits. That is, in a mortgage suit, if the amount given is not repaid, then the mortgagee has a right to bring the property to sale. Therefore, it is called as foreclosure, sale, or redemption. A person has mortgaged the property, probably delivered possession, he is willing to pay back and he is not giving it back, then you have to file a suit for redeeming the mortgage. So for foreclosure, sale, or redemption, in the case of a mortgage, off or charge upon immovable property. This is the third type of suits which are dealt with under section 16. Then, fourth type is for the determination of any other right to or interest in immovable property. Apart from mortgages, apart from leases, charges, there are other types of interest created on immovable properties or dispute regarding immovable properties, and they are the type of suits which are dealt with in section 16. Then we have the what is called as compensation for wrong to immovable property. If a wrong is done to the immovable property, wastage, damage, destruction, the suit is for recovery of money, but it is reference to a wrong done to an immovable property. It emanates from a wrong to an immovable property. Therefore, immovable property is situated at a particular place. And lastly, for recovery of the immovable property, actually under distraint or attachment. Properties are attached, they have to be brought to sale, and then it has to be sold. Therefore, where exactly the property is situated, it is under distraint. So in all these cases, section 16 categorically says, suits of this nature shall be instituted in the court within the local limits of whose jurisdiction the property is situated. Here there is no exception. That is, if you are dealing with an immovable property, whatever may be the nature of the suit, the court who has jurisdiction over the immovable property or the area where the property is situated and the area where the court is functioning alone will have jurisdiction. Now the question is, how do you decide? Monetary, pecuniary, we understand 5 lakhs and less and above. In the case of territorial jurisdiction, as I said, when the civil courts are established, along with this establishment, that territorial jurisdiction is also decided. A map showing the area which falls within the jurisdiction is also prepared. It is available in the office. And the question is, this subject matter of the suit, that is the immovable property, is it falls within that particular area? It may be a plan or it may be number of villages attached to that particular court. If the property is situated within that village, if the property is situated within that plan, it is only that court which has jurisdiction to deal with matters within that area will have the territorial jurisdiction to decide the case. So when you want to file a suit, first you must look into the pecuniary aspect of it. Second, you must have an aspect of territorial jurisdiction. Pecuniary jurisdiction decides whether the suit is to be filed in the civil judge junior division or higher division. As far as territorial jurisdiction is concerned, that particular property and that particular court should be situated within that particular area. Otherwise, the question of that court competent to try this suit will not arise. Therefore, in all cases where immovable property is involved, it is the court, it is the place where the property is situated, and the court which has jurisdiction over that particular area is the court which alone has jurisdiction to decide the case. Now we saw wrong to immovable property, damages, encroachments, constructions. Again, it is with an immovable property, and it is that court which should have jurisdiction. So unless you are clear about these two aspects, the reason why I am saying is, today courts have been constituted in every nook and corner of the taluks, even in Hublis. Many times, if the lawyer doesn't have a professional approach, or sometimes the clients also want to go to a court which is very near to them. See, you cannot choose. It is not a shop where you can go and purchase what you want. See, it's a constituted under an enactment with a specific territorial jurisdiction, and you just because some court is by your side where you are residing, you cannot go to that because your property is somewhere else. So subject matter to the suit, the property, the immovable property, and where it is situated, and it is that court alone which has jurisdiction. If you do not look at it from a professional angle, and in the end of the day, the suit is written saying, present it's a proper court, it will be a reflection on the competence of the advocate. That means he has not done his homework, he does not know the fundamentals, unnecessary time, money is wasted, which results in delay in disposal of cases, which public doesn't understand. In the end of the day, they blame the court, and more so, the poor civil procedure code is the victim. Civil procedure code expressly says what you should do and what you should not do. If you do not understand and you go on doing what you want to do, whatever may be the civil procedure code, I am above that and I will do this, then that is the cause for delay in disposal of cases. So therefore, my appeal to the younger members of the bar is, though it may look very simple, only when you have a problem, you find the difficulty. Only when you commit a mistake. Please, if you have committed a mistake, error is human, retrace your step, set it right, be professional, and proceed with the suits. Don't go on, let the court do it. I will wait for it. Appeal is there. I will take a chance with the judge. See, all this should not. You may do all this. It may also give you some money, but it is not the way a professional is expected to do this, because question of jurisdiction, pecuniary jurisdiction, territorial jurisdiction is expressly stated in the Civil Procedure Code, and a lawyer is expected to have a first-hand knowledge, and a layman, a client, however intelligent may be, he doesn't understand these aspects. When he comes to you, entrust the brief, he expects you to protect his interest. And if that is not done, probably it will be a case of, I would say, incompetency on the part of a professional man. Now, day before yesterday, a question was put. Why was it put? That question is directly answered in section 17. That means you have not read section 17. Civil Procedure Code so exhaustive. If you are able to have the patience to read the Civil Procedure Code, think over it, understand it, for every problem there is a solution. The question was, when you are talking about subject matter of suit, if the property is situated in more than one taluka, district, are we to file 3 suits? The answer is in section 17. Suits for immovable property situate within jurisdiction of different courts. You can't express it in a better way. What does it say? Where a suit is to obtain relief respecting or compensation for wrong to immovable property, situate within the jurisdiction of different courts. The suit may be instituted in any court within the local limits of whose jurisdiction any portion of the property is situated. It has a proviso that is more important, provided that in respect of the value of the subject matter of the suit, the entire claim is cognizable by such court. So, proviso talks about pecuniary jurisdiction. The other part of it talks about territorial jurisdiction. This you come across in partition suits. A person, a wealthy person, goes on acquiring property, and sometimes government officials, wherever they are posted, they go on acquiring properties. And today, politicians, they don't know what to do. India is their area of operation. Sometimes it is also outside. So properties are acquired in different jurisdictions, different states, different taluks, different districts. Now, in the end of the day, when a suit is filed for partition and separate possession, which court will have jurisdiction? Is it the court in Karnataka? Is it the court in Andhra Pradesh? Is it the court in Bihar? And in Karnataka, is it the court in Bangalore? Is it the court in Chikmagalur? Or is it a coffee plantation is in Chikmagalur? So coffee plantation in Chikmagalur and he is in Bangalore. But property is both at Bangalore and Chikmagalur. Now the question is, which court will have jurisdiction? Are they expected to file several suits wherever the property is situated as contemplated under section 16? Answer is no. Section 7 says no. What it says in simple words is, first find out the pecuniary jurisdiction. If the property is situated in more than one district, more than one taluk, even in more than one state, if the total value of that property is less than 5 lakhs, you can file that suit in any court where that property is situated. Property is in Tumkur, property is in Chikmagalur, property is in Dharwad. 3 properties. You can file a suit in any of these courts. But the value of the property in Chikmagalur is 10 lakhs. The value of the property in Tumkur is 4 lakhs. And the value of the property in Dharwad is again 10 lakhs. You cannot file a suit in Tumkur whose jurisdiction is only 5 lakhs because the value of the property is 10 plus 10 plus 4, 24 lakhs. That court at Tumkur where you have to file has no jurisdiction. If at all you have to file it, you have to club all the value of the property, and it is only that court which has jurisdiction to decide that pecuniary limit will have jurisdiction. That is the difference between a civil judge and a civil judge senior division. In which event, though the value of the property is in Tumkur is 4 lakhs, you cannot approach the civil judge court because if you are adding all the 3 properties, the value is 24 lakhs. Therefore, the civil judge senior division will have jurisdiction to decide the suit for partition. So therefore, section 17 is a complete answer to a question when properties are situated in different jurisdictions, which is the court which is competent to decide. So you just find out what is the total value. If the value exceeds 5 lakhs, civil judge senior division in any of these places will have jurisdiction. If the value is less than 5 lakhs, it could be filed. So therefore, there is no ambiguity, there is no confusion. It is very clear. Now, then we have what is called as section 18. This is what happens. Of course, today we have people who what you call erase the boundaries of districts and states itself. So if there is a dispute, you do not know exactly whether it belongs to this taluk or that taluk, whether this district or that district. Section 18 says, place of institution of the suit where local limits of jurisdiction of courts are uncertain. You have to apply your mind, you have to make an order, then you proceed with it. That's what is said in section 18. Where it is alleged to be uncertain within the local limits of the jurisdiction of which 2 or more courts, any immovable property is situated, any one of those courts may, if satisfied that there is ground for the alleged uncertainty, record a statement to that effect and thereupon proceed to entertain and dispose of any suit relating to the property, and its decrease in the suit shall have the same effect as the property was situated within the local limits of the jurisdiction. Sometimes it so happens there's a road. The properties which are within this area falls with one court. The other side, it is one court, a lot of confusion, and the law says, apply your mind, make an order, then proceed. If anybody is hurt, let him challenge it. But without that, please don't proceed. Otherwise, again, question of want of jurisdiction. Similarly, the suits for compensation for wrongs to person or movables. That is also a case where a person is living at one place, a wrong is done to the person or to the movable property, road accidents. And the question is, which court has the jurisdiction? Certainly, the court where the wrong is done has the jurisdiction to go into that matter. Now, the most important and troublesome section in the Civil Procedure Code where a lot of controversies and case law has generated over the years is Section 20, where the subject matter is situated, probably not much of a confusion. What Section 20 speaks about is not what is covered under Section 16 to 19. It's an exception. What is that? Other suits. Suits not covered under the earlier section. Where do you find other suits to be instituted where defendants reside or cause of action arises? Subject matter of the suit, you file the suit, absolutely no problem. In other cases, two things. Find out where the defendant resides and find out where the cause of action arose. Maybe where the defendant resides also is an easy aspect. It may be a permanent address, it may be a temporary address, but still the principle behind this is when you launch a litigation against a person, naturally it is a sort of harassment to him. What is the crime he has committed? We don't know. What is the default he has committed? We do not know. But anyhow, when a suit is filed, he will be compelled to engage a counsel, compelled to come to court, contest the matter, and if he is a poor man, well, he had it. Therefore, the law takes care of such a situation and says, if you want to file a suit, not in respect of any immovable property, in other cases, you go to that place where he is situated and file it so that minimum inconvenience is caused. It is presumed the person who is filing the suit is a mighty man, person against whom it is filed is a very weak man, and the law goes to the rescue of the weak man and says, you file the suit where the defendant resides. Always where the defendant resides, that court has a jurisdiction in matters where the subject matter is not immovable. So therefore, the Section 20 has to be carefully read. Subject to the limitations aforesaid, every suit shall be instituted in a court within the local limits of whose jurisdiction, A, the defendant or each of the defendants, where there are more than one, at the time of the commencement of the suit, actually and voluntarily resides, or carries on business or personally works for gain. So actually or voluntarily resides or carries on business or personally works for gain. It is that court where he is doing all this will have jurisdiction to entertain the suit safely. You can go and file a suit where the defendant actually and voluntarily resides or carries on business or personally works for gain. And the B says, any of the defendants, if there are more than one defendant, where there are more than one, at the time of the commencement of the suit, actually and voluntarily resides or carries on business or personally works for gain, provided that in such case, either the court or the leave of the court is given, or the defendants who do not reside carry on business or personally works for gain, as aforesaid, acquiesce in such institution. Though section says, in practice, what are they doing? If there are 4 defendants, you choose the case where the main defendant is failing, you file the suit. The other 2 or 3 are outside. There is no question of you are filing an application seeking the leave of the court, which we are not doing it normally. They are served with the notice. In most of the cases, they engage a lawyer, appear, contest the matter, and that's the end of it. Very rarely such people take up a defense, no, I am not within the jurisdiction. Even if such a contention is taken, relying on clause A, if one defendant resides, mostly the main defendant resides, that court has the jurisdiction and it is taken up and the case is decided. So here also there is not a much problem. The problem arises regarding when the cause of action wholly or in part arises. So therefore, you must know what is a cause of action. How does a cause of action arises? Where the cause of action is arisen. And cause of action, as you know, is a very broad word. It has been interpreted in different ways by different people. So therefore, you have to find out what that cause of action is. This is, in the case of a contract, take it from me, we are all well aware, the place where the offer is made, the place where the offer is accepted, place where the goods is sent, the place from where the payment is made, where the place where the default is committed. All this, a part of the cause of action arises. So any court where this part of cause of action arose will have jurisdiction. So therefore, this section 20 applies where section 16 to 19 do not apply. And especially when we are talking about a cause of action, that is where the lawyer's ingenuity sometimes is exhibited, and you find 100 years case law on this particular point. Now, all that I want to say at this stage is, where the defendant resides, there's no problem. When it cause of action arises, if any portion of the cause of action has arisen, that court gets the jurisdiction. That court gets the jurisdiction. There cannot be any doubt about it. Therefore, when you want to plead cause of action so as to get jurisdiction, you have to bear this in mind. And unless that is borne in mind, unless that cause of action is properly pleaded, the question of that court will getting jurisdiction will arise. We find many times arguments are addressed on this particular aspect, and the court had to decide whether any portion of the cause of action is arising. Therefore, all that boils down to this. What do you mean by a cause of action? Broadly speaking, cause of action means every fact which, if traversed, it would be necessary for the plaintiff to prove in order to support his right to the judgment of the court. It does not comprise every piece of evidence which is necessary to be proved to entitle the plaintiff to a decree. Everything which, if not proved, would give the defendant a right to an immediate judgment and must be a part of the cause of action. So this is what a cause of action is. Especially when making a contract. Making of a contract is a part of the cause of action, and a suit on a contract can always be filed at the place where it was made. The determination of the place where it was made is a part of the law of contract. A contract by correspondence is made at the place where the letter of acceptance is posted, as it is a place where an offer of one party is accepted by the other party, and it is repudiated at the place where the letter is received. And if acceptance is by performance of a condition, the suit may be instituted at the place where the condition is performed. Therefore, this is a very important aspect. Now, let me tell you, when the lawyers act too smart, they are the losers. These are all the law which was very good for the last 10 years and before. Today, how does a contract emanate? People don't see each other. Today, we are in a digital world. Without looking at the persons, the contract is entered into. Now we say it is not necessary to sign the contract also. If it is sent by email, accepted there, I send a letter, you send the acceptance, I place an order, you send the material. There is no written contract in the sense, a contract as understood earlier under the Contract Act. Today we are in a digital area. And the worst part of it is, see about the intellectual property disputes. Infringement of a trademark, infringement of a patent, infringement of a copyright. Now, why are the Karnataka High Court doesn't have many cases of this nature? Why is our Bangalore City Civil Court doesn't have many natures? The reason is, please, my advocate friends, please understand. All these cases are today concentrated in Bombay, Delhi High Court, Bombay High Court, and some in Madras High Court. An infringement could happen anywhere. Infringement of a trademark it can happen in Delhi, it can happen in Madras, it can happen in Calcutta. And he has the choice to file a suit where the infringement has taken place. Same thing with the copyright. One is, in Karnataka, our High Court has no original jurisdiction. That is the privilege of few high courts in the country: Bombay, Calcutta, Madras, Delhi, Ahmedabad. Secondly, if you go on fighting only on this as lawyers, and you don't come to the merits at all, which businessman would like to come to Bangalore or Karnataka High Court? Therefore, they would prefer Delhi. Therefore, they would prefer Bombay, where original jurisdiction lies with the High Court and cases are also disposed of. This is what I've been saying. CPC is good. If CPT is abused, in the result, the legal profession suffers, the advocates suffer. Yes, question of jurisdiction is very important, and you must also know its limitations. Today, in an era of intellectual property rights, digital contracts, cyber law, the cause of action can arise anywhere. Now, you have social media, you have TVs. Every day, in and out, people are defamed. Earlier, it is the place where you are living. Today, you are defamed throughout the country. Any court you can choose and file it. And in the bargain, the bar loses. So please, my appeal to you is understand these provisions properly, the object behind it, have an idea about the change in the law, and please don't do anything which will damage the profession, and certainly it will not be in your interest. People want decision on merits. Question of jurisdiction is also equally important. It is enacted in the Civil Procedure Code, but it should also have a limitation. If you are only sticking to this and want to say, oh, this court has no jurisdiction, people won't come to the court at all, where will you have brief? And that is what has happened with my little experience in the state. Today, we do not have intellectual property litigation in this country. It is because of this advancement of technology and science and the interpretation of this provision called cause of action. Wherever the infringement takes place, that court has jurisdiction. Wherever the trademark is violated, patent is violated, and damage is done, that court has the jurisdiction. All that he has to say is, my trademark is violated somewhere in Delhi, in Bombay, and you can file the suit. So that's how the law has been trained, and therefore this place of suing assumes importance, and especially advocates practicing, especially in these cases, be reasonable. I'm not saying you concede jurisdiction to get the case, but you should be reasonable. Ultimately, the cases have to be decided on merits. Today, take the statistics. You don't have cases at all as compared to Delhi High Court and Bombay High Court and some in the Madras High Court. All intellectual property. Cream of the litigation has gone out. So therefore, please understand this concept of place of suing. It is equally important to a litigant, equally important to a lawyer, equally important to the administration of justice. And therefore, this objection certainly should be considered properly, and it should not be carried beyond a particular point. Now, you may ask me, am I not doing my job as a lawyer? Can we look into these aspects? The answer to that is found in section 21. I'm not saying it. Section 21 of the CPC itself says, this objection regarding jurisdiction should be taken at the earliest point of time and at or before settlement of issues. Though it's a question of jurisdiction, you cannot take it at any time you want. Because if it is taken at the earliest point of time, at or before settlement of issues, it will be decided the preliminary issue, and if that court has no jurisdiction, it will be returned so that you can prosecute it in the court where it has jurisdiction. But you cannot take it after trial in the end of the day. What section 21 says is, objections to jurisdiction. No objection as to the place of suing shall be allowed by any appellate or divisional court unless such objection was taken in the court of the first instance at the earliest possible opportunity and in all cases where issues were settled at or before such settlement, and unless there has been a consequent failure of justice. That is, objection is not taken, court went into the trial, a judgment is passed. When in the appellate court it is said, look, that court had no jurisdiction. Even if that court had no jurisdiction, the appellate court should not interfere unless there is a consequent failure of justice. In other words, if a court which had no jurisdiction entertained a suit, conducted a trial, defendant had ample opportunity to participate, he participated, he cross-examined the plaintiff's witnesses at length, he led elaborate evidence, he argued the matter, and then a judgment came which was against him. He will not be permitted to say in the appellate court that court had no jurisdiction. The law is very clear. A judgment and decree passed by a court without jurisdiction is a nullity, non-est. But once this process has been completed, you will not be heard to say, unless you make out a consequent failure of justice. What do you mean by a consequent failure of justice? You file a suit against a person in Rajasthan. That man is unable to come. Once he comes, second time you refuse adjournment. There is some problem, railway problem, airline problem, corona problem, and a decree is passed. There is a failure of justice because you filed a suit against a person there, not here. You should have filed a suit there. You filed a suit here. You were not able to come and participate. The result is he suffered a decree. If he is able to point out a consequent failure of justice, yes, appellate court may interfere. But as I said, if he has participated, he had the full opportunity. He made use of the opportunity. When the case went against him, he will not be allowed to say, please set aside the order on that ground. Similarly, subsection 2 says, no objection as to the competence of the court with reference to the pecuniary limits of its jurisdiction shall be allowed by any appellate or revisional court unless such objection was taken in the court of the first instance at the earliest possible opportunity and in all cases where the issues were settled at or before the settlement and unless there has been a consequent failure of justice. So 1 speaks about territorial jurisdiction, 2 speaks about pecuniary jurisdiction. Then 3 says, no objection as to the competence of the executing court with reference to the local limits of its jurisdiction shall be allowed by appellate or revisional court unless such objection was taken in the executing court at the earliest possible opportunity and unless there has been a failure of justice. Because there is a judgment of the Supreme Court, EIR 1954, page 340. They said, if a decree is passed by a court without jurisdiction, even a pecuniary jurisdiction, that objection can be raised at any stage in appeal, in revision, and even in execution proceedings and in collateral proceedings. With great respect, I say that judgment runs counter to the statutory provision. These objections regarding jurisdiction should be taken at the earliest point of time, at or before settlement of issues, not at any stage, merely because the question of jurisdiction. And therefore, if you want to raise the objection regarding jurisdiction, either territorial jurisdiction or pecuniary jurisdiction, you must be alert, read it in the written statement, get an issue frame, try that issue as a preliminary issue, and then work out your remedies. But you slip over the matter. In the end of the day, if you raise this, the appellate courts will not entertain such. Now, a peculiar situation was arose because of the Supreme Court judgment. When we lay down the law too broadly, this is what happens. A judgment rendered by a court without jurisdiction is a nullity. Fine. Appellate court dismissed it. All suits of civil nature are cognizable civil courts unless expressly or by necessary barred. So what the lawyers will do? Ingenuity. All right. Here is a decree passed by a court without jurisdiction. File a suit for declaration. This decree is one without jurisdiction, passed by a court without jurisdiction. Suit for declaration. Value at 1,000 rupees and pay 100 rupees court fee and file it off. Therefore, CPC was amended. Section 21, capital A, bar on suit to set aside decree on objection as to place of suing. No suit shall lie challenging the validity of a decree passed in a former suit between the same parties or between the parties under whom they or any of them claim, litigating under the same title on any ground based on the objection as to the place of suing. The explanation to that says, the expression former suit means a suit which has been decided prior to the decision of the suit in which the validity of the decree is questioned, whether or not the previously decided suit was instituted prior to the suit in which the validity of such decree is questioned. Because section 11 is not attracted because that court did not have the competence to decide the case. For the principle of res judicata to apply, both the courts should be competent to decide the case and one court has decided it, therefore the other court has no jurisdiction. Here the argument is that former suit, that court did not have jurisdiction. And there is an objection which can be taken under section 44 also. Therefore, section 21 capital A was introduced to say, if that court had no jurisdiction, you try your luck by filing an appeal. If the appellate court says, no, I will not interfere, that's the end of it. You cannot file one more suit for a declaration that the decree is passed by a court without jurisdiction. That is impermissible. These are all the ways the blame on CPC is sought to be corrected. Civil courts are there. It's a civil matter. You pay court fee, you file the suit, return statement, issues, goes on, and blame is on the CPC and the civil administration of justice. Now they said such a suit is not maintainable at all. Now, sometimes in practical, what happens is, I file a suit here for partition. He files a suit for partition in the court. So what is to be done? So Civil Procedure Code is a remedy for that. Section 22 of the Civil Procedure Code says, power to transfer suits which may be instituted in more than one court. Read it along with section 17. Properties are situated in different places. Court cases are filed in different jurisdictions. Then how many trials you will take? This section says, where a suit may be instituted in any one of two or more courts and is instituted in one of such courts, any defendant, after notice to the other parties, may, at the earliest possible opportunity, and in all cases where issues are settled at or before settlement, apply to have the suit transferred to another court, and the court to which this application is made, after considering the objection of the other side parties, shall determine in which of the several courts having jurisdiction the suit shall proceed. That is consolidation of proceedings, clubbing of cases. Question is, which court should decide? That will be decided by a higher court. That is contained in section 23. To what court the application lies? Where several courts having jurisdiction are subordinate to the same appellate court, an application under section 22 shall be made to the appellate court. Where such courts are subordinate to different appellate courts, but to the same high court, the application shall be made to the said high court. Where such courts are subordinate to different high courts, the application shall be made to the high court within local jurisdiction. The court with the suit is brought is situated. So therefore, Civil Procedure Code comprehensively deals with cases where suits are filed in different jurisdictions and the cases may be brought to one court. And the only question is, it is the appellate court which has the jurisdiction to hear appeals against that, will have the jurisdiction to order for clubbing or transfer of one case from one court to another court. This is called as consolidation of proceedings, or you call it as clubbing, or you call it as common trial. That is what is expected. And again, the law says, please do it at the earliest point of time before the trial commences. Issues are settled. You know what is the issue involved. Parties are the same. Merely because the property is situated in different forums, different cases are filed, ignorance or deliberately. Certainly the defendant could be alert, make an application, get all the cases brought to one court, whichever court the appellate court decides, and in one court the case shall proceed, so that it would avoid conflicting judgments, harassment to the defendant, and justice could be delivered properly. Therefore, when the Civil Procedure Code exhaustively deals with this subject, that is place of suing, you cannot leave it to the judge. The lawyer should take the call. You know the subject matter of the suit. You know the relief which you want. You know the pecuniary limits. And you must choose the court which is competent to try that case and take a decision on merits. And you should not be taking chances. If you take a chance, well, a client may not understand, but when he understands, his respect to you would get diminished. He will have a feeling, my lawyer did not know the law. He did not know the law, that is, he did not know to which court the case is to be filed. How will he decide my case? How safe is my case in his hands? Will the doubt which he gets it. Hitherto, the litigants were different. Today we have educated litigants. You have what is called as Google, ready-made answers. Right or wrong, he will get some information. And he will also take advice from others. and you will be the touched. Therefore, the best way is obey the law. Follow the law in letter and spirit. Respect the law. When you respect the law, you need not care for anything. Let anybody say anything. You have done your job. You are within the four corners of law. You need not worry about. When you are not within the four corners of law, when you do not follow these express provisions, when you do not work it within these provisions which are explicitly stated in the Civil Procedure Code, don't blame the CPC, if not anything else. One of the main reasons for delay in disposal of cases in civil suits is we fight for considerable time on the question of jurisdiction. This is something which a client is innocent. It is what the professional people, the lawyers and the judges have to decide. And in these jurisdictional aspects, if we take time, and that is the reason for delay in disposal, none of us have no business to comment on our judicial system or the civil procedure. Civil Procedure Code explicitly deals with every situation and it has given remedies. Only thing is you have to understand it properly, and with humility, you must try to follow that provision and see that justice is done to the parties. If that is not done, as I repeatedly saying, don't blame the CPC. It is not following the CPC which is the root cause for delay. And if you follow CPC, these are all provisions which are not amended. This is there from 1908. So please understand the pain with which these provisions are carefully drafted, worded. Even today, we are not able to alter that full stop or a comma. Forget about amendments. That 21A is the latest amendment because of the ingenuity of the lawyers to put an end. That provision is there. Otherwise, all the other provisions are this. One other aspect, last aspect, which I want to say is that is where you come across. When we talk about cause of action, the cause of action is at more than one place. Courts at more than one place have jurisdiction. So in business, what is well established is in the invoice, there will be a column. Only courts at Bangalore will have jurisdiction. But for that, Bombay court has jurisdiction, Bangalore court has jurisdiction. Sometimes Pune court also has jurisdiction. You place orders with Bombay, goods come from Pune, you make payment to Bombay. All the three courts have jurisdiction. Parties are given the right to choose one among them. By choosing one among them, you are ousting the jurisdiction of the other courts. Now, there's a lot of case law on that point. Now, the latest law, as I understand, is this. If you simply say Bangalore court has jurisdiction, you are not ousting the jurisdiction of Bombay and Pune. If you want to oust the jurisdiction of Bombay and Pune, the words to be used in that is Bangalore court only. The word only assumes importance. Three courts have jurisdiction, parties agree, disputes shall be resolved only at Bangalore courts. Merely mentioning Bangalore will not. Bangalore only, courts only will take away the jurisdiction of other courts. Here, let me also remind you the principle. By consent, you cannot confer jurisdiction. Assuming in Bangalore, no part of the cause of action has arisen. You cannot by consent introduce a clause in your invoice saying Bangalore court will have jurisdiction. Bangalore court alone will have jurisdiction. Bangalore court to have jurisdiction, a part of the cause of action must have taken place in Bangalore. If it has taken place, then by introducing the clause Bangalore courts only, you can exclude the jurisdiction of Bombay and Pune. If no part of the cause of action is arisen in Bangalore, by agreement of parties, you cannot confer jurisdiction on Bangalore courts. This is a well-settled principle. Please bear it in mind when these, because we find a lot of controversy, a lot of case law, a lot of litigation goes up to Supreme Court on this. Now, almost it is well settled. Yes, you have the jurisdiction, you have the power to use the jurisdiction. If you want to do it, use the word only. But under no circumstances, you can confer jurisdiction in a court where no cause of action has arisen. Okay, thank you. Let us have some questions.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your exquisite knowledge with us. Now I request Professor Dr. V. Sudesh, former Dean and Principal of University Law College, to take over the question and answer session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. That was indeed a very interesting presentation. Some of the questions that are lined up for today are, sir, should both territorial as well as pecuniary jurisdiction be satisfied in order for a suit, or fulfilling either of them is enough?
Both should be satisfied.
Thank you, sir.
Both should be satisfied.
Fine, sir. The next question is, where should a defamation should be filed?
Wherever the defamatory statement is made, wherever the defamatory statement is published, both the courts will have jurisdiction.
Sir. Thank you, sir. The next question is, in a suit for mandatory injunction, suit valued 6 lakhs and for court fees concerned 1,000 valued, then where it will be filed? Which court has got proper jurisdiction?
For the purpose of court fee, it is 1,000.
Yes, sir.
For the purpose of jurisdiction, it is 6 lakhs.
Okay.
Therefore, it should be filed in the civil judge senior division.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so the next question, the questions which are not related to CPC, I'm not asking, kindly pardon me. The next question is, sir, the right to sue for damages for breach of contract on a promissory note, for a debt on a mortgage, for wrong done to property, are all instances of rights that are not extinguished on the death of the plaintiff or defendant. Yes or no, sir? Yes, sir.
Correct.
Fine, sir. The next question. In case for recovery of money, if the payment is made by plaintiff from a bank at Bangalore to the defendant at Ahmedabad, can the suit be filed in Bengaluru by pleading that the cause of action has partially arisen in Bangalore?
If the defendant resides at Bangalore and check is issued from Bangalore, the Bangalore court has jurisdiction to go into that.
Sir, the last question as per the chat box is, in a suit for injunction, can defendant seek counterclaim of declaration?
It can be done. There's a difference between, tomorrow I'll be dealing with that. What is a counterclaim and what is a set off?
Fine, sir. Last question, sir. Does legal notice only give rise to cause of action?
Legal notice, yes, also gives rise to a part of the cause of action, because legal notice arises after the cause of action has arisen. A
Fine,
cause of action for the suit has arisen. You have to inform the other side to make good. Therefore, through a legal notice, you are saying it. Issue of a legal notice by itself is not a cause of action. Cause of action should precede the issue of a legal notice. Once the cause of action has arisen, by a legal notice, you make a demand. So that making of a demand is a part of cause of action. And the demand is not obeyed, that is a part of cause of action. And then the suit has to be filed.
Pardon me, sir. One last question. This is, if defamatory matter is published on the internet, what will be the jurisdiction?
That's precisely what I was saying. Now in a cyber law, digital law, defamatory statement is published in the internet. By mere publishing in the internet will not amount to defamation. If that defamatory statement is read by a person which is in the internet, wherever he sees, that court will have jurisdiction. That's why I said in internet, whole world sees it.
Thank you,
It is open, whole world. So your reputation is gone wherever it has been read. And that is the cause of action. And therefore, you can file a suit at any place. That is precisely what I am saying. These provisions, they never imagined. Now the law is going, and the law is also now changing, and the law has also been interpreted accordingly. In the case of intellectual property rights, where infringement of trademark, infringement of copyright, infringement of patent is alleged, infringement may take place anywhere. Cyber law, digital contracts. So therefore, today this concept of cause of action has been multiplied in several ways. That's what the court jurisdiction. That's why I said before taking that objection, be clear. Don't lose your right to file a suit in Bangalore. It can be filed anywhere else. That's precisely I said Bombay High Court, Delhi High Court, Madras High Court have virtually cornered all these litigations between themselves.
sir. This is a question, since it relates to professional fees, I think I must ask. The question is whether a suit can be maintained in a civil court by an advocate to recover his professional fees on the basis of an oral agreement for the mediation of a dispute done outside the court privately.
Why not? Whether you have rendered services for both for work inside the court and outside the court. Suppose you have a mediation. Mediation is always done outside the court. You have rendered your services. If there's a contract to pay some money and the contract is not paid, they suit for simple recovery of money for services rendered. Certainly a lawyer can file a suit for recovery of his legal charges for services rendered outside the court. Because when you do conveyancing, it is not inside the court. You give legal advice. It is not inside the court. There is nothing like inside the court. That is litigation. Conducting a case. Here it is for giving his legal service.
Fine, sir. If there are no more questions online, may I kindly sum up today's presentation? Gautam Chand, sir? Okay, let me sum up. Sir, today you have spoken about the fact that filing of a suit in the appropriate court makes a right beginning for a lawyer. Filing of a suit has two components, lowest grade court and competent court. And you reminded us this lowest grade does not mean it is inferior. What it means is it refers to the pecuniary jurisdiction and territorial competent court. Sir, you have said that it is only a rule of procedure. If a matter is filed in a higher court, but it can go back to the civil judge court only as a matter of procedure. But if a matter which has to be filed in a senior division court comes to the lower court, then it becomes a matter of jurisdiction. The other thing, sir, you said that lawyers must have a professional approach insofar as filing of suits in the proper jurisdiction courts are concerned. Sir, you also said that objection to place of suing must be taken at the earliest opportunity available. Finally, sir, you said that be alert to take objection on all kinds of pecuniary jurisdiction or subject matter jurisdiction. CPC is good. Don't abuse it. Obey the law and respect the law is the advice that you have given to the young fraternity of lawyers. Thank you so much, sir.
Varsha.
Yes, sir.
Varsha, please make.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your analytical reviews. And I also extend my sincere thanks to Professor Dr. V. Sudesh. A good event never ends in the world. They take only a pause and keep us awaiting for the next. Sir will be enlightening us on the topic pleadings and issues tomorrow. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speaker, Honorable Justice N. Kumar, Shri Gautam Chand SF, President of KSBC Law Academy, Shri Anil Kumar JM, Chairman of KSBC Law Academy, all the members and trustees of KSBC Law Academy, hosting committee, and most importantly, all the participants who are actively taking part in the webinar series, not only in the Zoom platform, also in the YouTube and Facebook platform. I request all the participants to join with the same meeting ID and password at 5:30 p.m. daily till 13th November 2020. Have a delightful evening. Thank you all.
Thank you. Namaste.